Welcome, and here we go again. And today on the channel, I will be taking a look at the Doctor Who spin-off show, Class. And why, well, the question is, why did it fail to succeed? Now, there are many reasons behind this, I think, and Class wasn't a particularly popular thing, really. It didn't strike people in the same way as, say, Torchwood or Sarah Jane Adventures, which were the other spin-off shows. And it felt rather unsuccessful in various ways. And I think there's certain different aspects of why it wasn't successful, and it just was a spin-off that didn't work. I mean, personally, I think it was okay. I don't think it was bad per se, but I didn't particularly. It didn't catch me in the same way that Torchwood or Sarah Jane do, and I've forgotten most of it. And you know, it isn't anything fantastic. It isn't something particularly good. It's just sort of there, and I forget about it most days. But when it was on, I enjoyed it enough. But now, it's just sort of there. So it's sort of just a part of the fandom that's there. But it was very unpopular when it was on because people didn't really gel with it. It tried to go for a sort of teen approach, which was something that a spin-off hadn't done before. We'd had Tortured, which went for an adult-based audience. We had Sarah Jane Adventures, which went for a kids-based audience. And obviously Doctor Who, which went for a family-based audience. So it was interesting to see what they do with a teen approach. And, they do shove that teen element down your face. Sometimes it works as that type of show. Sometimes it doesn't. It just feels a bit typical of those sort of shows. Feels like it has all those annoying little stereotypes that you have with those sort of shows. And it was broadcast on BBC Three, and it was when BBC Three went online. So it was a few weeks after it stopped airing on television. BBC Three used to be great. It was the place where Torchwood started. It was a place where Doctor Who was often repeated. It's where I first saw the show, if I'm honest with you. It's where I first saw Doctor Who. And I used to watch through the episodes on a Friday or a Saturday or whenever it was that they showed them. And they brought Doctor Who back to BBC Three with the spin-off show, as obviously it's a more sort of teenage-based demographic as a service, BBC Three. So that's one of the reasons why it wasn't popular, because it was broadcast online, not many people knew about it, and it was in the early days of BBC Three. Another reason was because it was hardly ever advertised. I don't think there were any trailers on TV. This is at a point where Doctor Who was not advertised much itself, and we're still in that stage right now where Doctor Who isn't advertised a great deal, or at least Series 12 wasn't, Series 11 was, but the Capaldi era was a bit neglected by the BBC, and I think Klaus was the same. So BBC Three broadcast it and on their streaming service, and then they decided to bring it to BBC Two, I think, or BBC One, but they decided to put it on a graveyard slot. That meant it went out at about 1 o'clock in the morning, which is a time when nobody watches things, and it got about 60,000 views on sort of television when it was broadcast on those nights, and it slipped down from there as well. So it was doomed to fail from the start, partly because the BBC failed to advertise it. It felt like at the time the BBC didn't really care about it. They didn't really want it to be a success. I don't think they cared about Doctor Who a great deal because it wasn't giving them ratings at the time. So when Class came along, they just decided to neglect it. Whether that was because they knew it wouldn't succeed, or whether they didn't want it to succeed for some reason, but they did neglect it when it went on to broadcast. And I think that's partly because of those sort of very weak viewing figures when Class first dropped. I think it was mainly a Whovian demographic that tuned into it. And with that demographic, it wasn't very popular. I know social media was very angry about it, didn't really enjoy it per se. It doesn't feel like Who, really. It doesn't feel like Who. You know, with Torchwood and Sarah Jane, there's at least moments where it feels like we're in that same universe as Doctor Who. Whether that be because it explicitly references Doctor Who, which, you know, this series does, but or whether it's because it just has that same tone and feel and charm to it that Doctor Who has. And that's probably because it was written by, those two shows were heavily inputted by Russell T Davies, whereas this show didn't have a great deal of input by Stephen Moffat, and it was mainly written by young adult author Patrick Ness. So there wasn't really much feeling that it was from the same universe of Doctor Who, and for that reason it didn't click with a lot of fans. I think Sarah Jane in particular sort of felt like Doctor Who a lot of the time, or the junior version, and Torchwood had times where it felt very Doctor Who like, and obviously we had the character of Captain Jack. Now they tried putting Peter Capaldi in the first episode, however that didn't really work because, you know, it just felt a bit forced. His appearance was a bit shoehorned in, even though it was nice to see him. The characters were a bit weak. They're not really that memorable besides Miss Quill. Whereas when you look at the Sarah Jane Adventures or Tortured, they've got strong characters, memorable characters, likeable characters. And these ones aren't particularly likeable, in a bad way. And the monsters are very typical, very average, and appear too often throughout the series. The plots themselves are quite weak most of the time. There's some good episodes, but there's also a lot of bad ones. So it's a very mixed bag. There were only 8 episodes, but about half of them are good, and half of them aren't very good. So yeah, but some of the characters are good. Some of the episodes are good, but it's a very mixed bag for me when it comes to Class. But a lot of people didn't really gel with any of the episodes. Those of them who sat through it all. And the last thing, nobody really asked for it. You know, it didn't really make any sense that it was released. With Sarah Jane Adventures and Torchwood, it felt like those shows had relevance to Doctor Who. It felt like they added something, they added substance, they had sort of connections, and they intertwined with Doctor Who. Those two shows were set up in Doctor Who, and they were important for Doctor Who, particularly when it came to Stolen Earth, Journey's End, when the 3 shows crossed over. Oh, excuse me. Whereas when it came to Class, it felt like there wasn't any connection. It felt like there wasn't any need for it, and nobody really asked for it. There were lots of spin-offs that could have been done. The Paternoster Gang, or Unit, or even the 8th Doctor series that everyone seems to want. But this one, nobody ever asked for it, and that's why it was unpopular. And I think from the future, they need to learn from Class about how to make a spin-off show, and they need to learn to promote it, to not neglect it, and to create something that fans have asked for. You know, whether that be the return of Tortured, or whether that be Unit, or, you know, Ruth Doctor, I don't know, something that has relevance to the show, some substance, some connection to the past, that's more sort of notable than just a school that appeared in the first episode of the show. So, yeah, it failed, didn't it? There's no way getting around that. What did you think of Class? Did you like it? Did you not? It was very divisive. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tomorrow I'll be taking a look at what I want from Series 13. If I were writing it, if I were in charge of it, what would I do if I was running Series 13? Anyway, have fun all, and we will see you all, or I will see you all, tomorrow.